And welcome to this edition of EMS Now Up Close. I'm Eric Miskell with EMS Now, and it's my pleasure today to speak again with Chintan Sutaria, the president and founder of CalcuQuote. I think most people know these days that CalcuQuote is a provider of quoting and supply chain software to the EMS industry. Has a whole platform of services or services of solutions there that they, I think starting with the quote CQ was the original one, if memory serves correctly here. So Chintan, it's been a busy year for you. Thank you for taking some time and sitting down with me again. I always look forward to this.
Yeah, glad to be talking to you.
Yeah. So what I've always wanted to ask you is, you grew up in the EMS industry. You know this intimately well from, and you can share the story if you want, but as a result of that experience, you decided to focus on the most tedious yet critical process in all of EMS, that being quoting, right? I mean, you could have picked moisture sensitive devices, you could have picked all these other things, but led you to that, or that's what you decided to pursue. And I've always kind of just wanted to know why you chose that, and kind of undoubtedly there was resistance, because I'm sure this was proprietary sensitive information within companies, right? And so tell me about that decision.
Yeah, so there's it's a two-part story. There's the personal reason and then there's the business reason. So I'll start with the personal, which is back when I was in EMS, we had this customer that had sent us like a 300 assembly quote package that, they do it every 2 years or something, and you just have to quote these 300 assemblies, and they give you months and months to do it, but you got to do 300 assemblies. And it was very complex. And I remember spending my Thanksgiving week on this, right? Like it was Thanksgiving Day and I was still at the office cranking through just the worst version of a spreadsheet that you can imagine. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. So that was kind of my first aha moment of, and I'm very good at Excel. Like I know how to use Excel. And still, I was struggling with this very complex endeavor that I was like, well, if I had a database and I could go through it that way, this would be so much easier. So that was kind of one part of it. The business justification for solving the personal problem was that when I looked at it, it was like, okay, really, if you want to solve problems in EMS, I'll give you kind of a secondary example here. Is I remember being in a conversation where we were talking about improving how responsive we are to customers, right? And it was like, okay, we want to be able to get product from order to delivery in a matter of 5 days, which at the time was like a ridiculous goal, right? Like, how are we going to achieve that? Well, what I realized was we were spending more than 5 days on a quote. So really, if we could get the quote back in the customer's hands in 1 day, then you'd have all of a sudden 4 extra days for everything after that. And then same thing with purchasing. It was like purchasing was taking so long that it was like, well, we're talking about shaving minutes off of the production time, when instead we could talk about shaving days off of everything pre-production. And so that's what got me into the focus on the everything before a kit is released to the floor. And so from there, it was like, well, what's the tip of the spear? Quoting is where it all starts. And so we started with quoting, and then it just flowed down from there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And how was that with, the resistance you must have, now I remember dealing with EMS companies who, they have whole departments that were quoting departments, right? These 5 guys that stay in a room and they, crunch numbers and put together spreadsheets, right? So it's really kind of a willingness to give that up and to accept a solution from outside must have been difficult to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the proof is a little bit in how we do it, right? So I'll give you an example. We do occasionally, less so now, but especially when we first started, it was like, how the heck is this software going to tell me how to do a quote and do it accurately? Because I've been doing this for 20 years. I have all this knowledge in my head. How is it going to translate that? And the way that we would handle that is, as an example, we've done this exercise with more than one customer where we'll say, okay, how many people do quoting here, right? They'll say, oh, there's 4 of us. Okay, we're going to put the same exact assembly in front of you, all 4 of you, without talking to each other, come up with the quoted price. And then we'll get somebody who is relatively junior to all 4 of you, and they will, using an algorithm, using CalcuQuote, using the structure that we offer, the systematic way of doing things, come up with a quoted price. And so what usually happens, and I say usually, it's happened every time we've done this, is each of the 4 people ends up all over the map. right? Like they're wildly different from each other because they don't have a systematic way of doing things. And then they'll say, okay, talk to each other and come up with an agreed upon price, right? And so they start talking, and they eventually, after 30 minutes of arguing with each other, agree that, oh, you forgot to include functional tests, you forgot that conformal code, this has this weird exception. They come up with a price, and we'll say, okay, there's this guy who wasn't in the room listening to all of this. He came up with the same price in the first 5 minutes, just plugging in the variables.
Yeah.
And that's how we tend to approach that, because yeah, there is a lot of resistance to it, but you just have to show them that math can solve this problem.
Yeah. And I'd imagine, and digitalization was a great enabler in all this too, right? So,
absolutely. It's so much easier when you say, hey, the big part of what everybody feels a pain point about is finding the components and finding the price of the components and all that. And we say, well, that becomes a non-issue now. Now it's about your pricing and all of that stuff. So yeah, the labor and overhead estimation part of it is the hard thing to pull away from. But even on the supply chain side, it helps to be able to say things that used to take you days now take you minutes.
Yeah. And one last kind of within the tool too, there's always within EMS, the management decision as to how much they want this business, right? So you take the pricing and then say, yeah, but we want to give the extra discount because this is business we want to do. We're trying to establish ourselves in this region, sector, or whatever. I'm assuming the tool then still allows for all of that.
Absolutely. Like one of the common things that we actually see is there's this, I don't know what the analogy is like, you know, if you have multiple cooks, they'll keep adding salt to the soup kind of thing. And you end up with, yeah. So what we've seen is in the cases where there's not a well-defined process, everybody's adding their little layer on top of the cost. And so at the end, when you're actually trying to decide whether you're going to offer some sort of discount or penetration pricing or whatever, you don't actually know what your base costs were to figure out how much you're actually willing to add on top of or remove from your bottom line. And so what ends up happening is they're not making informed decisions about when they should offer any kind of promotional pricing or something. So our thinking is that you should have a clear picture of what your costs are, and then decide how much you want to manipulate that for the final price.
Right, right. Good. Now you mentioned the component piece, so let's pick up on that. I mean, I'd imagine, well, I'd be curious that with the component shortages that are plaguing the industry right now, what are you seeing on your end in terms of quoting activity? There is a lot of respins, a lot of revisions, requoting. What's happening?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things with CalcuQuote, and we've observed this behavior since we first started, component shortage aside, this has been a common theme, is especially if you're in high mix, low volume EMS world, the first selection criteria for when you're choosing a supplier on a particular component is, do they have stock? And then they start looking at price, right? Because, and I think the same thing holds on the supplier side. I had a supplier once tell me in a meeting, he was like, you can't sell what you don't have. And so, yeah, we got to think about our stocking levels before we start thinking about our pricing. So the stock is always the most important thing. One of the things that we've noticed now is a trend towards depleting stock, right? And this has been an ongoing thing for the past year, right? But I think typically we used to see high 80s or maybe even 90s in terms of stock on hand, like sufficient stock on hand. We've seen overall a 9% drop in that in the past year. And in the last quarter, we see it's actually like in the 70s, meaning that when somebody's looking for a component, only 70% of the time, they're actually seeing sufficient stock on hand for that component, which is a huge deviation from the 90s, because now all of a sudden you start to see, you know, if you have a 100 line item BOM, you can't do anything with 70-something% of the parts.
Yeah, exactly. I remember we used to have upon receipt of complete kit is the way we used to phrase it. And we'd have to remind customers that the PCB board was actually part of that kit as well. That having all the components is great, but we also need the board. So tell me your platform, the various solutions that you have. What are you planning and what is needed, or maybe what enhancements are you planning in that particular area? Kind of what's your next step in this improving the whole supply chain connectivity?
Yeah, so you actually covered one of them. So reminding people that the board is part of the needed components, right? So we have something that internally right now we're calling board CQ, but it's basically getting the PCB manufacturers connected into the EMS quoting world as well. So putting some productivity tools in place for the board houses, but also being able to digitally connect them into the EMS space, because now we have more than 200 EMS companies across the globe using CalcuQuote, and they're all looking for PCBs. And not only are they looking for PCBs, they're looking for quick responses, because it used to be that the PCB wasn't the bottleneck, right? You could get the PCB quote in a few hours or the next day, and that would be sufficient. The components were the bottleneck. Well, now the component pricing is available. The PCB is the bottleneck. So now they're focusing their attention on responsiveness from their PCB vendors. So that's one part of it. The other part of it, and this is more to do with the current times, is getting more distributors connected in, because the stock is harder to find, right? So you're having to go to your secondary sources, tertiary sources, and getting more of those suppliers connected in. So that's kind of the second thing. And then the third thing is we have ShopCQ. We've had a really good response rate from customers interested in using ShopCQ. But where the quoting world was 5 years ago is where the ordering world is today, meaning that being able to execute purchase orders via API, getting an instant confirmation back. Some of the major distributors have already started supporting this capability, but that's got to trickle to every other company for this to be the new way of doing purchasing in the industry. So we already have the industry leaders all in on it. Now it's just getting adoption across the entire industry to say the way we execute purchase orders is by API. And it's kind of like the same way people upgraded from fax to email. Now it's going from email to this.
Okay. That's interesting about the board CQ, as you called it there. That's, I guess I always assumed that the boards were subsumed under the shop piece there, but maybe they were, but it needed to be drawn.
Yeah, which you can definitely still do that in CalcuQuote. I think the point is about enabling the PCB side, right? So our customer base has always been the PCB assembly side of it, and they can always get their quotes from the PCB vendor. But what we're seeing is they need the quotes even faster than the PCB companies are ready to deliver. And so that's where we're trying to enable them to be better suppliers to the EMS company.
Okay, no, that's good. That's good. So what then, in your opinion, are the biggest challenges to making the connected supply chain vision a reality?
So one of the biggest things there is inertia, right? And as somebody who deals with EMS companies, this is it's an industry that likes having seen a history of proof before they make a change, right? And so from that perspective, we have a lot of just inertia of people saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I need more competitive pressure for me to change. So we already started to see that in markets on the quoting side, where we see this trend where if we have 1 or 2 customers in a specific region, then all of a sudden in a couple of months, we'll have 5 to 10 customers. Why? Because all of a sudden there is a competitive pressure. But going to get those first couple customers in a new market for us is so hard because there's no competitive pressure. People just expect that quoting takes a long time, ordering takes a long time. So the inertia is really hard to overcome. And I think that's changing pretty quickly now, because that globalization, competitive pressure, customers' expectations of needing things faster. You hear about this, like the B2C side drives the B2B side. And we're definitely seeing that, where the expectation from the customers of our customers are getting to the point of, why isn't this faster? Why isn't this done already? Why isn't it delivered with 2-day prime delivery? So, yeah.
No, I think you're right. The expectation of an instantaneous response is real, right? And if it isn't, even on email, right? If I don't respond on an email quick enough, people think, something's wrong. So
Absolutely.
That's interesting. So tell me then, you deal with a lot of EMS, you see a lot, you engage with a lot over the course of doing your business. So what advice would you offer to EMS companies in the current climate that this industry finds itself in?
So advice for EMS companies, so of course, I'll qualify this with each EMS company is facing their own challenges, right? There's no single solution for everyone. The most common thing that we see is, I think it's organizing the process is the most important thing, or is the most common issue that people have. So it's funny, I mean, most of my conversations are usually about the API connectedness and the spreadsheet and things like that. But what we usually trace it back to is you need the business process in place first before you automate it, because if you're still going to do the automated version in a bad, inefficient way, our VP of product, David Sharp, he has this saying, he says, software is something that'll just get you where you were going to go, but faster. And so whether that was going to be a really inefficient outcome or an efficient one, it's just going to get you there faster. And so I think process improvement is a really big thing for us, which is why all of our products, everything we do, we try to think of it from the mindset of end-to-end process. So QuoteCQ, end-to-end RFQ management, ShopCQ, end-to-end purchasing management. That's what helps us be able to kind of solve it more holistically than just saying, here's a tool for a specific problem, but that might not be your bottleneck.
Right. No, that's very good. So you've been growing, I mean, expanding, it's been a busy year for you and CalcuQuote. How are you staying connected with, you have a team all over, globally now, right? So how are you handling that? How are you managing that? Obviously, the digitalization works and supports that, but from a process standpoint, how are you handling that as an executive?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, I'll say we went through our share of growing pains, right? When COVID first started, we were basically a binational company. We had people in the US, we had people in India. About 2-3 months into COVID, all of a sudden we had employees in 4 different countries. And now we have employees in 7 different countries, 5 different time zones with 11 hours between us, right? Yeah. So there's definitely those challenges of scaling globally. I think one of the ways that we handle it is, we have routines set up, right? So we have our, especially around our core values. So like learning is a core value. So we have a weekly meeting for just learning. Anybody's welcome to attend. We use Zoom religiously. In fact, we were using Zoom back in 2017. And so it's become our primary mode of operating anyways. So yes, we get very comfortable with these virtual interactions. The other thing that we do quite a bit of is just virtual fun things. So we'll have a virtual Christmas party. We'll toy around with different ideas, but the point is, like, you have to keep that culture of having fun with your colleagues in whatever window this allows you into, right? Because otherwise it's really easy to start to feel like just a mundane part of your day instead of, oh yeah, these are people I like and I like to collaborate with and share ideas with.
Yeah.
So.
Because I know obviously travel has been stunted here for the last long time, and hopefully that starts changing in the new year here. So I think everybody, technology goes so far, right? But it's not a substitute for personal relationships. So
absolutely. And I think that's, we had our sales team get together a few weeks ago for the first time, and they'd never met each other, as we expanded globally. So we all got together for the first time in Frankfurt, and it was like a family reunion, because we've all met each other through Zoom windows, but now it was really nice to get to see each other. We got more done in 3 days than we had in the previous 2 months thinking about our sales process. So those types of things are, definitely missed and hopefully starting to return soon.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. That's good to hear. Well, listen, I appreciate getting the update from you today. It's always, yours is a company that I've always watched with great interest, and because I think of the solution, and having worked in an EMS and worked with EMS, I know how painful that process can be. So I look forward to continuing to track your successes, and hopefully we can get another update from you maybe in the new year.
Sounds good. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Chintan. Be safe.